The morning sun spilled over the rusted rooftops of a small coastal town in Cebu, Philippines. The air was heavy with the scent of salt, wood shavings and promise. A chorus of roosters crowd from nearby backyards, their voices mixing with the rhythmic tock of a hammer against wood. Inside a humble workshop made of bamboo and tin, a boy named Raymond knelt beside his father, sanding the leg of a half-finished chair. Raymond was 16, slender and quiet, his hands calloused far beyond his years. Every morning, before the world woke up, he and his father, Tete Ernesto, would begin work. It wasn't just a job, it was survival. They built furniture for the neighbors, repaired old fishing boats and sometimes, if luck smiled, crafted small wooden crosses for the church in exchange for rice. Smooth Anak, his father said softly, guiding his son's hand across the grain. The wood must feel like it's breathing. Raymond nodded. He liked the way his father talked about wood, as if it were alive, as if every plank had a story. Yet, there was something else that filled their workshop besides the smell of varnish and sawdust music. Every afternoon, when the work slowed, Tete Ernesto would take out a battered old guitar. The one he'd bought decades ago in a pawnshop when he was courting Raymond's mother. It had scratches, a missing tuning peg, and a small crack down the side, but it still sang. He'd strum softly, and his deep, rough voice would love me tender, love me sweet, and without fail, Raymond would join him, shy at first, his voice blending perfectly with his father's. Together they sang Elvis Presley songs while the sunset painted the ocean gold. It became their ritual. Music instead of television, harmony instead of comfort. But beneath the singing and smiles life was hard. Raymond's mother had passed away when he was 8, a fever too quick and too cruel. Since then, his father had carried the family on his back, building, repairing, doing anything that would keep food on the table. They lived in a wooden shack on the edge of town, where the waves lapped gently against the stilts at night. Some nights, dinner was just rice and salt. Other nights, it was nothing but songs and laughter to fill the hunger. Still, Raymond never complained. He loved his father deeply, for his quiet strength, his dignity, and the way he still smiled despite everything. But deep down he also felt the weight of guilt. He wished he could do more than sand furniture and carry planks. That guilt turned into determination every time he sang. Because when Raymond sang, something in him changed. The world, small, harsh, and full of limits, began to open. His voice, though young, carried an emotion that seemed to come from lifetimes of struggle. The neighbors often paused outside the workshop, drawn by the sound of the boy's voice echoing through the wooden walls. Ramon, one old lady said once, leaning on her cane, you sound like an angel with a little bit of pain. He smiled shyly, not sure what to say. His father beamed with pride though, and gave him a gentle pat on the shoulder. You hear that, son? You've got something special. Don't let it go. Then one evening, something happened that would change everything. They had just finished sanding a large cabinet for the mayor's wife. The work was done, the sky was turning orange, and Raymond was cleaning up when a faint voice came crackling from their old radio. Auditions for Asia's Got Talent will be held in Manila next week, the announcer said in Tagalog. Singers, dancers, performers, everyone is welcome. Ramon froze. Manila, the city of dreams. He had heard about it only from travelers or seen it on TV when he watched talent shows at the neighbor's house. It seemed like another world entirely. Tete Ernesto noticed his son's wide eyes. What's that, Anak? Ramon hesitated. They're having auditions in Manila, Tay. Big ones. The kind that are on TV, his father chuckled, wiping his brow with a towel. That's for rich folks, maybe. People with fine clothes and fancy voices. But as he turned back to pack his tools, Raymond saw something soften in his father's eyes. A flicker of memory, or perhaps hope. Later that night, when the candles were low and the sea breeze blew through their window, Ernesto spoke again. You know, your mother used to love your singing. She said one day the world would hear it. Maybe. He paused, his voice trembling. Maybe your voice can build us a better life than my hands ever could. Ramon looked up from his mat. His father's face was lit only by the soft glow of a kerosene lamp. The wrinkles told stories of years of struggle, but his eyes held faith, quiet, unshakable faith. Do you think I could really do it, Tay? The boy whispered. His father smiled. Nak, your voice already makes this house feel rich. That night, Raymond couldn't sleep. He stared at the stars through the gaps in their roof, listening to the ocean whisper outside. He imagined standing on a stage so big that the lights would blind him, imagined singing into a microphone and hearing applause echo across the room. Then he thought of his father, his rough hands, his tired smile, and how much he deserved rest. Maybe this was the way. Over the next few days a quiet determination grew in him. He began saving every coin he could, refusing merienda, walking barefoot instead of paying for a ride, repairing broken chairs for neighbors in exchange for a few pesos. When he wasn't working, he was practicing his songs, the same Elvis tunes that had once been lullabies. Sometimes, late at night, his father would wake and see him singing in the dark, his voice soft but steady. Ernesto would just smile and pretend to be asleep. By the time the bus rolled into their village a week later, Raymond had gathered just enough money for a one-way trip to Manila, a few hundred pesos, tucked carefully into his pocket. His father handed him the old guitar, now restrung with wire from a fishing net. "It's not much," Ernesto said, "but it's your story." Raymond hugged him tightly, feeling the warmth of years of sacrifice in that embrace. "I'll make you proud, Tay," he whispered. As the bus pulled away, the sun rose behind the palm trees, casting long shadows over the wooden workshop where everything began. Tay Ernesto stood by the roadside, waving with a trembling hand, his eyes glistening with both pride and fear. Raymond looked out the window, clutching the guitar. His heart pounded not from fear, but from purpose. He didn't know what awaited him in Manila, he didn't know if anyone would even listen. But he knew one thing for sure: he would sing for the man who built dreams out of wood and love. And somewhere deep in the sound of the wheels on the road, it almost felt like the rhythm of an old Elvis song, humming the start of something extraordinary. The bus rumbled through the night, its engine groaning as it wound through the mountains that separated Raymond's small coastal town from the sprawling chaos of Manila. Inside, he sat by the window, clutching his father's cracked guitar like a lifeline. Each bump in the road made the strings hum faintly, like the instrument was whispering comfort. He had never traveled so far in his life. The only journeys he knew were the short walks from the workshop to the church or the sea. Now, as the hours stretched on, he watched the world change, palm trees giving way to concrete, starlit skies to neon signs. The other passengers dozed, their heads bobbing to the rhythm of the wheels. Raymond couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw his father's face, that proud, trembling smile as the bus pulled away. His chest ached, but in a good way, the kind that told him he was doing something that mattered. He whispered to himself, "For you, Tay, this is for you." When the bus finally arrived in Manila, the air was thick with smoke and noise. The city was alive in a way that felt almost unreal to him. Jeepneys honking, street vendors calling out, the scent of roasted corn and gasoline mixing in the air. He stepped off the bus, barefoot except for worn-out slippers, clutching a small bag that held his only clothes and the few coins left from his trip. Raymond felt invisible among the crowd, just another face, another dreamer in a city full of them. Still, he walked with quiet determination, asking strangers for directions to the audition venue. "Asia's Got Talent, that's at the Cultural Center," one guard finally told him, pointing toward a massive building that seemed to scrape the sky. When Raymond arrived, the line of contestants wrapped around the entire block. Singers with perfect hair and sparkling clothes stood beside dancers with branded sneakers and fancy equipment. Some were stretching, some rehearsing. Cameras and crew members moved around, capturing moments of excitement. Raymond swallowed hard. He looked down at his faded shirt, the same one he used when sanding chairs, and his father's guitar, patched with tape. He could feel the weight of his own poverty pressing against him. But then, he remembered his father's words, "Your voice can build us a better life than my hands ever could," so he stayed. Hours passed, the sun blazed down, but Raymond never complained. He sat quietly under a tree, practicing softly. Some contestants laughed when they noticed his broken guitar. One whispered, "He's not even dressed for TV." Raymond just smiled. "It's not the clothes that sing," he said gently. Finally, as the day began to fade, a crew member with a clipboard called his name, "Ramon de Vera, you're next." His heart nearly stopped. He stood, brushed the dust from his pants, and followed her through the backstage doors. Inside, the stage lights were blinding. The arena was vast, hundreds of people, cameras everywhere, and a panel of judges sitting under spotlights. Raymond recognized one immediately, Simon Cowell, the man whose face he'd seen so many times on TV, often frowning, always brutally honest. "Name?" Simon asked, glancing at his notes. "Ramen, sir." "Raymond de Vera, from Cebu." "And what will you be performing today, Raymond?" asked another judge, a kind-looking woman with warm eyes. "Elvis Presley, ma'am." "Can't help falling in love." Simon raised an eyebrow. "That's a big song. Are you sure you're ready?" Raymond nodded, though his knees trembled. He adjusted the microphone stand, feeling the eyes of the entire audience on him. The guitar strap dug into his shoulder. He thought of the workshop, the smell of sawdust, his father's humming, the sound of the sea outside their home. He took one deep breath and whispered under his breath, "This one's for you, Tay." Then, he strummed the first chord. At first the sound was small, fragile, like a candle flickering in the wind. The audience murmured softly, unsure what to expect from the shy boy in worn clothes. But then, Raymond began to sing. "Wise men say only fools rush in." The moment the words left his lips, the air changed. His voice wasn't perfect, it was raw, tender, full of emotion that came from somewhere deep. It carried the weight of late nights in the workshop, the ache of hunger, the love of a father who gave everything. The crowd grew still. "But I can't help falling in love with you." Each note seemed to shimmer with sincerity. There was no pretense, no act, just truth, the kind of truth that pierced straight into the heart. The judges leaned forward. One of them blinked rapidly, trying not to cry. Another pressed her hands to her chest. Even Simon's expression softened, his chin resting on his hand as if trying to process what he was hearing. And then came the bridge. Raymond's favorite part, the one his father always sang a little louder, his voice gravelly but warm. Raymond closed his eyes and poured everything into it. Take my hand, take my whole life too. His voice cracked slightly, not from weakness but from emotion. It was real, unpolished, beautiful. The kind of crack that told you the singer wasn't performing, he was living the song. When the last note faded, there was silence, not the kind that comes from indifference, but the kind that follows something holy. Then, like a wave breaking, the audience rose to their feet. Applause thundered through the theater. Some people were crying. One judge wiped her eyes openly. Raymond just stood there frozen, holding his guitar, unsure what to do. Simon finally spoke, his voice softer than anyone had ever heard it. "Raymond," he said, "I don't think I've ever heard Elvis sung like that. You didn't just sing the song, you lived it. And that," he pointed to his heart, "that's what makes it unforgettable." Raymond blinked, speechless. Another judge added, "You reminded us why we fall in love with music in the first place." "Thank you for that." Raymond lowered his head, his lips trembling. "Thank you, Po," he whispered, using the Filipino honorific instinctively. As he walked off the stage, the crowd still cheering behind him, he felt his chest fill with warmth. It wasn't pride, it was gratitude. Gratitude for his father's faith, for the songs that shaped his soul, and for the chance to show the world what love really sounds like. Backstage, a producer ran up to him, eyes wide.
"Raymond, that was incredible!"
"You're going viral already. The world needs to hear this." He just smiled, wiping a tear. "If they hear my song, I hope they also hear my Tay-Tay in it." Outside, under the Manila night sky, he looked up at the stars, the same ones that shone above his father's workshop miles away. The air smelled of promise. He didn't know what would happen next, but deep inside, he knew one thing: this was only the beginning. The following morning, the world had already started to whisper Raymond's name. Clips of his audition, the shy Filipino boy in a worn white shirt, holding a cracked guitar and singing Elvis with heart-wrenching honesty, had flooded social media overnight. People shared the video across continents, captioning it, "The voice that made the judges cry." But Raymond didn't know any of that yet. He was sitting on the steps outside the venue, still in disbelief, his guitar case beside him. His stomach growled. He hadn't eaten since dawn yesterday, but he felt full in another way. He could still feel the echo of the applause in his chest, like thunder lingering after a storm. When a young production assistant approached and said, "Raymond, the judges want you back on stage. They're doing interviews." His heart skipped. He followed her quietly, clutching his guitar. As they led him through the backstage corridors, he passed contestants who had watched his performance live on the screens. Some smiled encouragingly, while others simply stared, a mix of admiration and awe.
"Hey," one singer called out, "you made Simon Cowell cry!"
"No one does that!" Raymond smiled, unsure how to respond. He didn't want to think of it as a miracle. He just wanted to believe it was his father's faith that had somehow traveled with him onto that stage. Back under the stage lights, the air felt electric again. The audience was smaller this time, journalists, producers, and camera crews, but the energy was the same. A host greeted him warmly. "Raymond, people all over the world are talking about your performance. How does it feel?" He shifted shyly, eyes downcast. "I just sang what I feel in my heart, that's all, Po." The host smiled. "And where did you learn to sing like that?" Raymond hesitated for a moment, then looked into the camera. "From my father," he said softly. "He's a carpenter. He builds with his hands, and I guess I build with my voice." That line, honest, simple, pure, spread like wildfire across the internet that very night. A week later, the show's producers invited him to return for the next round of the competition. This time it would be televised to millions. The stakes were higher, but the heart behind his voice remained the same. When Raymond arrived for the live show, he felt like he was walking into a dream. The theater was massive, more cameras, brighter lights, louder cheers. Everything about it felt unreal. But he carried the same old guitar, still patched with tape, still humming faintly when he tuned it. "Ramon de Vera," the host announced, as spotlights swept across the crowd. The audience roared. Some people already held signs with his name on them. Simon Cowell leaned into his microphone. "Last time, Raymond, you brought the world to tears. What are you singing tonight?" Raymond looked up and smiled. "Another Elvis song." Simon raised an eyebrow again. "Another Elvis song, why?" Raymond took a deep breath. "Because Elvis sang for people who didn't have much. People like us. My father says the songs remind us that dreams are free." There was a pause, the kind that always precedes something extraordinary. Then he began. "There must be lights burning brighter somewhere." But his voice was stronger this time, surer. But it still carried that same soulfulness, that ache of someone who had known hunger and loss but never let them define him. The melody filled the theater, but what truly captured everyone was the emotion. Raymond didn't just sing, he prayed through every word. Out there in the dark, there's a beckoning candle. He closed his eyes, remembering the flickering flame of their kerosene lamp back home. He imagined his father working late, sanding the last pieces of wood by its soft glow. The thought made his voice tremble, not from fear, but from love. In that moment, he wasn't performing for judges. He was singing to Tete Ernesto. Singing to the boy who had learned to hope beside him, building furniture and dreams in the same breath. And while I can think, while I can talk, while I can stand, while I can walk, the audience rose slowly, as if lifted by the sheer force of his passion. Some covered their mouths, others closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them like grace. Simon Cowell leaned back, speechless, the same man whose reputation was built on breaking dreams now holding back tears. When the final line came, Raymond's voice cracked just slightly, perfectly, and he whispered the last words, "While I can dream, please let my dream come true." Silence. And then, a collective breath. The entire theater erupted in applause. The judges stood up, all four of them, clapping through tears. It wasn't the kind of ovation that came from entertainment. It was the kind that came from the heart. One judge, still dabbing her eyes, said, "Raymond, you didn't just sing about dreams, you made us remember ours." Another added, "That was pure human and divine all at once." Simon Cowell, visibly emotional, took a long pause before speaking. "Raymond," he said finally, his voice cracking, "I've judged thousands of singers in my career. But sometimes someone walks in who reminds me why I fell in love with music in the first place. You're one of those people." The crowd cheered again, louder than before. Cameras zoomed in on Raymond's tear-filled eyes. He tried to speak, but all he managed was a whisper, "Thank you, Poe, for listening." Backstage, he sat alone for a moment, overwhelmed. He could hear the muffled roar of the audience still echoing through the walls. His guitar rested across his lap, the wood warm under his hands. He thought of home, of the salty wind, the creak of wood in the workshop, his father's gentle humming. He imagined Tete Ernesto sitting by the radio, perhaps watching on a neighbor's small TV, his eyes wet with pride, and in that quiet corner, surrounded by bright lights and distant applause, Raymond whispered a small prayer. "Lord, if this is my path, let it lead me home." He didn't care about fame or fortune. He just wanted to make enough to rebuild their house, to fix the roof that leaked during storms, to give his father the rest he deserved. That night his performance was replayed millions of times. It trended across the world, not because of flashy vocals or high notes, but because of truth. People in New York, London and Sydney posted comments like, "This boy sings like he's carrying someone's heart. I don't understand Tagalog, but I understand this kind of love. That's not a voice. That's a soul speaking." And back in Cebu, in a small wooden shack by the sea, Tete Ernesto sat in front of a flickering TV, tears streaming down his weathered face. He pressed his hands together, looked up at the ceiling and whispered, "You did it, son. You made them feel what I've always known." When Raymond got the call that he'd advanced to the finals, he didn't celebrate. He just sat quietly, smiled, and said, "I can't wait to tell my father." Because for him, the greatest victory wasn't the golden buzzer or the global praise. It was knowing that somewhere in a tiny village, a carpenter was finally smiling with pride, his son's voice carrying across the world like a song made of love and sawdust. In the small seaside village of San Remigio, morning came quietly. The waves rolled against the stilts beneath the wooden houses, and the smell of the ocean mixed with the familiar scent of sawdust. Inside a weathered workshop, Tete Ernesto sat on his wooden stool, his rough hands resting on his knees. The old radio beside him crackled softly. For days, the neighbors had been coming by to talk about one thing: his son. "Ernesto, your boy is on TV again," one woman said, fanning herself with excitement. "He's famous now." Another added, "He sings like an angel, Nang Ernesto." We all cried when we saw it. He'd just smile, humble as ever, nodding politely. "Salamat," he'd say. "That boy has his mother's heart." But when the noise of the village faded and he was alone, Ernesto's hands trembled. Not from age or exhaustion, but from pride. Pride so deep it felt like a prayer. That evening, he finally got the courage to ask a neighbor if he could watch the new episode, the one where Raymond sang, "If I Can Dream." The neighbor eagerly set up the tiny TV, the antenna wrapped in foil to catch a better signal. The whole barangay gathered, kids sitting on the floor, elders on plastic chairs, and then, there he was, Raymond, his boy, standing under the lights of Asia's Got Talent, guitar in hand, wearing the same shirt he'd left home in. As the first notes filled the room, everything went still. Even the ocean outside seemed to hush. Ernesto gripped the edge of his chair as tears welled in his eyes. Each lyric, each tremble in his son's voice carried the weight of their life. The nights without food, the mornings with blistered hands, the songs they sang to drown out hunger. When Raymond sang, "There must be peace and understanding sometime," the father's tears finally fell. He didn't weep out of sadness, it was something deeper. A release, a recognition that all the years of struggle had not been in vain. His son's voice was their story, told in a way he never could with words. When the audience on screen rose to their feet, when the judges wiped their eyes, Ernesto laughed through his tears. He stood up and clapped too, his rough palms echoing in the small room. "That's my boy," he whispered, voice breaking. "That's my boy." The next morning, a knock came at his door. It was the village chief, holding an envelope and smiling from ear to ear.
"Nong Ernesta, congratulations!
"The TV people are coming here. They want to film something. They said it's for a special feature." Ernesto blinked confused. "Film here?"
In my shop? Yes."
The chief said grinning. "They want to surprise your son." He didn't know what to make of it, but he nodded, his heart pounding. He spent the rest of the day cleaning the workshop, wiping the benches, polishing the tools, even brushing off the walls with an old rag. For the first time in years he wanted it to shine. When the crew arrived 2 days later, cameras and microphones in hand, Ernesto stood there nervously in his best barong, the same one he wore to church every Christmas. "Sir, we're filming a reunion," one of the producers said gently. "Your son doesn't know you're part of this. He thinks it's just another interview about his music." Ernesto's throat tightened. "So, I'll see him." The man smiled. "Yes sir, you'll see him soon." Meanwhile, in Manila, Raymond sat in the studio for what he thought was a regular interview. The host began by congratulating him for reaching the finals. "You've touched millions with your story," the host said. "But there's someone who's been touched the most. Someone very proud of you." Raymond's heart skipped. "My father," he whispered. The lights dimmed. A large screen lit up behind him. On it appeared a video, shaky, warm and real. It showed their small workshop by the sea, the same wooden chair, the same tools, and then, his father. Tete Ernesto sat on his stool, guitar on his lap, smiling at the camera. "Anak," he said softly, "every time you sing I can hear your heart. You sound just like your mother when you laugh." Raymond's lips trembled. The audience grew silent. Ernesto continued, "Remember what I told you, music builds homes too. And now, you're building one for us with every song." The video ended. Raymond was already crying. Then the host smiled and said, "Ram, we have a little surprise for you." A curtain opened at the back of the stage, and there, standing under the lights, eyes glistening, was Tete Ernesto. For a moment time stopped. Raymond froze, his breath hitched, then, before anyone could say a word, he ran, across the stage, past the cameras, straight into his father's arms. The audience erupted in applause. Some stood up, crying openly. Father and son held each other tightly, trembling. Raymond choked out, "You came all the way here." Ernesto nodded, his voice breaking. "Of course. You think I'd miss hearing my boy sing again?" The host handed Raymond his guitar. "Would you two like to sing together?" The crowd went wild. Raymond looked at his father, tears still streaming, and whispered, "Let's do our song." Ernesto chuckled softly. "Always Elvis, ha." Raymond grinned. "Always Elvis." They began softly, father's deep, rough voice blending with the pure, soulful tone of his son. "Wise men say only fools rush in." The audience fell silent once more. There was something sacred about that moment. A poor carpenter and his son, standing together before the world, singing a song that had carried them through hunger, through grief, through love. Their voices were imperfectly perfect. Ernesto's cracked slightly, but Raymond followed with gentle harmony, filling the spaces between notes with love. "But I can't help falling in love with you." When the last chord faded, the crowd rose to their feet again, roaring, crying, clapping. The judges stood too. Simon Cowell had tears in his eyes. "That," he said slowly, voice breaking, "wasn't just music. That was love in its purest form." Raymond and his father stood there, arms around each other, overwhelmed. Neither said anything. They didn't have to. After the show, away from the cameras, Raymond and his father sat quietly backstage. "You look tired, Tay," Raymond said softly. Ernesto smiled. "Tired, maybe, but happy. Happier than I've been in years." Raymond reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I've been saving my prize money. When the show's done, I want to fix the house, and build." His father looked puzzled. "Build what?" "A music school," Raymond said, eyes shining. "For kids like me. Kids who don't have much, but have voices." Ernesto's eyes filled again. "A school, yes," Raymond said, smiling. "You built chairs and tables for everyone in the village, Tay." "I want." Ernesto laughed softly, tears slipping down his weathered cheeks. "You already have, Anak. You already have." They sat there for a long while, side by side, a carpenter and his son, not speaking, just listening to the faint hum of the lights above them. And in that silence they both understood it wasn't the fame, or the stage, or the applause that mattered. It was the love that built it all. Weeks after the emotional reunion on Asia's Got Talent, the world had fallen in love with the story of the carpenter's son. Clips of Ramon and Tete Ernesto singing "Can't Help Falling in Love" spread across social media like wildfire. People called it the performance that healed hearts. From Manila to Madrid, from Cebu to California, millions watched and cried. Comment sections were filled with words like, "This is what music is supposed to be," and that father's pride broke me. But in the quiet fishing village of San Remigio, life returned to its rhythm, waves, wood and work. Except now something had changed. The same old workshop, once filled with silence and sawdust, now echoed with laughter and song. Children came every afternoon carrying cheap guitars, homemade tambourines, and voices full of dreams. Raymond had kept his promise. With his winnings from the show, he rebuilt their small wooden home and transformed half of it into a music school. Its hand-painted sign, the Dream Carpenter Music Center, where hearts learn to sing. The letters weren't perfect, painted by neighborhood kids, but the spirit was. Every plank, every nail, every melody carried love. One afternoon a soft rain fell outside as Raymond tuned a small guitar for a shy 7-year-old girl named Lanny. She wore torn slippers and a bright yellow ribbon in her hair. "Tito Raymond," she whispered, "what if my voice isn't pretty?" He smiled gently. "Lanny, do you know what my father used to tell me?" She shook her head. "Wood doesn't know it will become a chair," he said softly, recalling his father's words. "But in the right hands, it becomes something beautiful." He strummed a gentle chord. "Your voice is the same, let's shape it, okay?" Lanny nodded shyly. Her first few notes were shaky, but honest. Raymond encouraged her, tapping his foot and smiling through every off-key sound. Around them, other children joined in, laughing, learning, making mistakes together. Outside the window, Tete Ernesto watched with quiet pride. Later that evening, the sun dipped below the ocean, bathing the village in a golden glow. Raymond and his father sat outside the workshop watching the waves crash against the shore. The salt air smelled like memory. Ernesto leaned back, his calloused hands folded. "You know," he said, "when your mother was alive she used to say our house was too quiet." Raymond smiled faintly. "Not anymore?" "No," Ernesto chuckled, "now it's loud. But it's a good kind of loud. The kind that fills the heart." They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the faint sound of children singing inside. The tune was familiar, "Can't Help Falling in Love." Raymond glanced at his father. "They picked our song again." Ernesto nodded, eyes glistening. "They picked love." That weekend, something extraordinary happened. A letter arrived, thick, with a gold seal. It was from the producers of Asia's Got Talent. "Raymond," the letter read, "we are organizing a world charity concert called Voices of Hope. We would be honored if you and your father would perform together again. Live in Singapore, before thousands." Raymond's hands trembled as he finished reading. He looked up at his father who was already shaking his head. "Oh no," Ernesto said with a laugh. "Me, again on TV, I'm too old for that, Anak." Raymond smiled mischievously. "You said you'd always sing with me. That was before millions of people watch it." Raymond leaned forward. "Tay, it's not about people watching, it's about people feeling. You taught me that." Ernesto sighed. "You've learned to use my words against me. So you'll come." The father smiled. "Only if I can bring my hammer. Just in case the stage needs fixing." A month later, they stood backstage at the Marina Bay Sands in Singapore. The grandest stage they'd ever seen. The crowd was enormous, more than 10,000 people, but for Ernesto the lights were blinding. He held his guitar like a lifeline. Raymond placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Tay," he said, "remember what you told me before my first audition?" Ernesto raised an eyebrow. "That you should tighten your guitar strings." Raymond laughed. "No, you said, don't sing to impress, sing to express." The father smiled. "Then let's express Anak." When they stepped on stage the roar of the audience was deafening. Cameras flashed, and somewhere in the front row, Simon Cowell sat smiling, remembering their first performance. Raymond looked out at the sea of faces, then turned to his father. "Ready?" Ernesto nodded. "Always." The first chord rang out, simple, heartfelt. There must be lights burning brighter somewhere. It was, "If I Can Dream," the song that had carried Raman to the finals. But now, it wasn't just his dream, it was their dream. Halfway through Raymond stepped aside, letting his father take a verse. Ernesto's voice was rough, trembling at first, but then it steadied. The crowd leaned in, captivated. "Out there in the dark, there's a beckoning candle." As they sang the final chorus together, Raymond's voice soared, and Ernesto's harmony wrapped around it like an embrace. The audience rose to their feet before the song even ended. By the time the last note faded, the entire hall was in tears. Raymond turned to his father, smiling through his own. "You did it again, Tay." Ernesto chuckled softly. "We did it." The lights dimmed, and as they walked offstage hand in hand, the screen behind them displayed the words, "Dedicated to all fathers and sons who build dreams together." A month later, back in San Remigio, life was still simple. But now, the workshop had become a symbol of hope. Tourists and volunteers visited often, bringing instruments and donations. The Dream Carpenter Music Center had grown into a small foundation that sponsored young talents across the region. Lanny, the shy girl with the yellow ribbon, had just won her first regional singing competition. Raymond proudly handed her a new guitar, one carved by his father. "For you," he said, "to keep building your dreamy." "Thank you, Tito Raymond. I'll make you proud." He smiled. "You already have." That night, after everyone left, Raymond walked out to the shore. The moonlight rippled across the water, the same sea that had watched them struggle and rise. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Ma, we did it." Behind him, Tete Ernesto's voice called out, talking to the ocean again. Raymond laughed. "Just thanking it." Ernesto joined him, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "You've made this village sing again, Anak. Your mother would have been proud." Raymond looked at him. "No, Tay. You made this possible. You built it, with your hands, your love, your music." The old man smiled quietly. "Maybe. But you gave it wings." They stood there side by side as the waves whispered beneath the stars, and from somewhere inside the workshop, faint and pure, the children's voices drifted through the night, singing the same song that started it all. "Wise men say, only fools rush in." Raymond and Ernesto joined in softly, their voices blending with the ocean breeze. It was no longer just a song. It was a prayer, a legacy, a promise, that even the poorest hands could build something eternal when guided by love. And as the music rose into the night, the world seemed to listen, not to two singers, but to a father and son who had built hope, one note at a time.